When I first moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I had found the perfect place to settle down. The lawns were neatly trimmed. The houses were almost identical in their pastel shades, and the streets were so calm you could hear children laughing from blocks away. But what I didn't realize was that behind the manicured hedges and polite smiles lurked an HOA that operated more like a corporate dictatorship than a community association. It all started innocently enough. I purchased my home after years of saving, and I was proud of it. I wanted to make it truly mine, so I decided to add a small shed in my backyard. Nothing big, just a practical structure to hold my gardening tools. Lawnmower and a few boxes that didn't fit in my garage. The shed wasn't visible from the street. It matched the color of my house, and it was well within the property line. But apparently I had made a grave mistake. Just a week after the shed was built, I received a letter from the HOA. It was written in bold red ink, almost like a threat, and it declared that I was in violation of community guidelines. According to them, unauthorized external structures were strictly prohibited. The letter ended with a fine, notice, $500 per day until the structure was removed. I thought it was some kind of clerical error. Surely a small hidden shed couldn't be such a big deal. I reached out to the HOA president, a woman named Carol who seemed to thrive on control. She wasn't interested in discussion. She claimed the rules were the rules and that if I didn't comply immediately, the fines would begin to pile up. I tried to reason with her, pointing out that several neighbors had pergolas, swing sets, and even a gazebo that weren't mentioned anywhere in the rulebook. Carol brushed it off, saying those were approved exceptions. But my shed? Absolutely not. That's when the nightmare began. True to her word, the HOA started sending me daily notices, each one adding another $500 to my supposed debt. The letters piled up, the threats escalated, and eventually, I started receiving warnings about potential legal action if I didn't pay up. Within 2 weeks, according to their accounting, I supposedly owed them $7,000. I felt trapped. Selling the house wasn't an option. I loved where I lived, and I wasn't going to let a power-hungry HOA bully me out of it. But at the same time, I couldn't justify tearing down a perfectly good shed. That's when I decided to do something the HOA never expected. I began to research. Late nights were spent combing through community bylaws, county zoning codes, and even old archived HOA documents. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how flawed the HOA's rules were. They were filled with contradictions, outdated clauses, and vague language. It was almost like they had been stitched together by a group of busybodies who had never imagined anyone would actually read them cover to cover. And then I found it, the loophole, buried in an old section of the bylaws, written in language so dense I almost missed it, was a clause that defined external structures. According to their own rules, anything that was not permanently affixed to the ground did not count as a prohibited external structure. In other words, my shed, which sat on a foundation of concrete pavers but wasn't bolted down, technically didn't qualify. I couldn't believe it. But I wasn't going to run to the HOA with my discovery right away. I wanted to make sure everything I did was airtight. So, I took pictures of the shed, documenting that it could be moved if necessary. I even had a friend help me lift one side just to prove it wasn't fixed in place. Then, I gathered county zoning regulations that confirmed sheds under a certain size required no special permits. Once I had all the evidence, I sent a certified letter back to the HOA. Inside, I included photos, highlighted excerpts of their bylaws, and a copy of county regulations. I calmly explained that my shed did not violate any rules and that any attempt to continue fining me would be harassment. The reaction was immediate. Carol called me the very next day, furious. She claimed I was misinterpreting the rules and that the HOA board would not tolerate such defiance. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. I told her everything was in writing, and that if she wanted to continue pressing the issue, I was more than willing to bring it to court. What Carol didn't know was that I had already consulted with a lawyer. The lawyer confirmed that not only was my shed perfectly legal, but the HOA's attempt to fine me without proper cause could actually land them in hot water. Still, Carol pushed forward. She tried rallying neighbors against me, painting me as a troublemaker who didn't care about community standards. Some of my neighbors started giving me side glances, but others quietly came to me, whispering that they admired what I was doing. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had been unfairly targeted by the HOA's heavy-handed rules. One neighbor had been fined for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. Another had been warned about leaving their trash cans out 5 minutes too long. People were sick of the constant surveillance, the nitpicking, and the endless stream of fines. As the tension grew, I decided to go one step further. I didn't just defend my shed. I used the same loophole to build something new. This time, it was a small deck platform in my backyard. Again, it wasn't affixed to the ground, and it complied with every technicality in the bylaws. I built it during the weekend, fully expecting another round of angry letters. Sure enough, the HOA pounced. Another fine notice arrived, threatening me with daily penalties. But once again, I replied with documentation, citing the loophole. I even added a copy of the lawyer's statement. At this point, Carol was losing control of the narrative. More neighbors began openly questioning the HOA. Why were they being fined for trivial things, when the rules themselves were full of contradictions? Why was the HOA wasting money chasing after petty grievances instead of improving the neighborhood? The pressure mounted, and eventually, the HOA board was forced to hold a community meeting. The turnout was huge. For the first time, residents voiced their frustrations collectively, and many pointed to my situation as the tipping point. People demanded transparency, accountability, and a review of the outdated bylaws. Carol tried to maintain control, but the tide had turned. She was voted out as president, and a new board was elected. The new leadership immediately canceled all outstanding fines against me, confirmed that my shed and deck were legal, and began revising the rules to prevent abuse of power. In the end, not only did I keep my shed, but I also helped spark change in the entire neighborhood. What started as a $500 a day fine turned into a revolution. Against an overreaching HOA. The funniest part? That shed, the one they fought so hard against, ended up becoming a gathering spot for my neighbors. We joked that it was the Freedom Shed, a symbol of standing up to unfair authority. Sometimes, small acts of resistance can ripple out into something much bigger. And the best part? I never paid the HOA a single dime.